Joshua chapter 22, on the verge of civil war. This is an intriguing chapter, which can basically be viewed as a closure to the section of the book dealing with the allotment of the land. Then Joshua called the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh. So just like we met the 2.5 tribes that were destined to live on the east side of the Jordan in the opening chapter. So here we meet in the closure of the allotment, once again, those very 2.5 tribes. Where in the first chapter, Joshua approached the tribes and reminded them of their commitment and pledge to fight with the Israelites on the west until the conquest was completed, and only then return to their cities on the east, where they left their children and livestock. So here, in the closure of the allotment, Joshua once again approaches them. And he said to them, "You have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed me in all that I commanded you. You have not left your brothers these many days to this day, but you have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers as he spoke to them. And now turn and go to your dwellings, to the land of your possession, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan." And here he also sends them with a certain warning or words of encouragement. Only take diligent heed to do the commandment and the Torah which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God and to walk in all his ways and to keep his commandments and to cling to him and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Here we see the language, which is very prominent also in the book of Deuteronomy, the idea of loving God and working him with all your soul, which echoes what we saw in the opening chapter in the words of God to Joshua himself. Here we're in the opening chapter. First, we have the Reubenites and the Gadites, right? Again, being spoken to, and Joshua reminding them of their pledge to Moses, etc. And in that very chapter, previously we just read about the obligation to be strong in keeping the Torah. Well, these echo the words that we saw in the opening chapter when God tells Joshua, just be strong and very courageous to observe and do in accordance with all of the Torah that Moses, my servant, has commanded you, right? So we have really a nice closure here, and this could be like a kind of first stage of closure to the book. But like I said, this is in relation to the allotment of the land. And then in verse 6, we return to our chapter 22, and Joshua blessed them and dismissed them, and they went to their tents. Now, interestingly, we have a separate approach with regard to the half tribe of Manasseh, where it is as follows: "And to the half tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given inheritance in the Bashan, but to the other half, Joshua gave among their brothers on the side of the Jordan westward." So the tribe of Manasseh is unique in that it's split. It dwelled both on the west and on the east. And also, when Joshua dismissed them to their dwellings, he blessed them. We have a separate blessing to Manasseh. And he said to them, saying, "Return with much wealth to your dwellings, and with very much cattle, with silver, and with gold, and with copper, and with iron, and with very many garments. Divide the spoil of your enemies with your brothers." So this is a little peculiar that we have a separate speech by Joshua to the half tribe of Manasseh. It has led some scholars to speculate that this may be a later addition or a separate segment which was added. And indeed, there are parts in the chapter where we see only a relation to Reuben and Gad, and not the half tribe of Manasseh. Later on, as well at the end of the chapter. So this is part of the theory. Here you can see in the end of the chapter, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad called the altar. So there we don't have the mention of the tribe of Manasseh. It's very interesting because already we can see this separate attitude in relation to the half tribe of Manasseh in the Torah itself with Moses, in the time of Moses. If we relate to the original request by the tribes to inherit on the east. So we read there, the descendants of Reuben and Gad had an abundance of livestock, very numerous, right? And they saw the land of Yazer, all these areas, and then they request to inherit there. But note, we only have a mention of Reuben and Gad there, right? So they approach Moses and they tell him, this is in Numbers chapter 32. So we read in verse 5, they said, if it pleases you, let this land be given to your servants as a heritage. Do not take us across the Jordan. This is the first request. If they did not want to cross to the west, they wanted to remain on the east. And Moses' very harsh reaction, right? Moses said to the descendants of Gad and descendants of Reuben, shall your brethren go to war while you stay here? And he reproves them, why do you discourage the children of Israel from crossing over the land, over to the land which the Lord has given them? This is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, recalling the sin of the spies, which eventually led to a delay, right, in entering the land, right? The anger of the Lord flared on that day, and he swore, saying, none of the men from the age of 20 years and over, right, will enter the land. And behold, he continues, you have now risen in place of your fathers as a society of sinful people to add the wrathful anger of the Lord against Israel. So Moses reacts very harshly to this proposal, request to not cross to the west. What, you're all the rest of the tribes, your brethren are going to fight on the other side and conquer the land, and you rest, you already have your inheritance on the east, which was conquered by all of Israel when they were in the time of Moses, right, on the eastern side of the Jordan. So realizing the impropriety of this request, in verse 16, they offer the following. They approached him, namely Moses, and said, we will build sheepfolds for our livestock here and cities for our children. We will then arm ourselves quickly and go before the children of Israel until we have brought them to their place. Our children will reside in the fortified cities on account of the inhabitants of the land. We shall not return to our home until each of the children of Israel has taken possession of his inheritance. So they agree to fight, and they accept that it's inappropriate that they not take part and help their brothers to conquer in the west. They say, we'll only leave our children and our livestock back here, and we, the fighters, will go over to the west of the Jordan and fight with our brothers. Moses reacts to this counterproposal and says, if you do this thing, if you arm yourselves for battle before the Lord, and your armed force crosses the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven out his enemies before him, right, that is fine. Then afterwards you may return, and you shall be freed of your obligation from the Lord and from Israel. And this land will become your heritage before the Lord. Now look what he says. It's an interesting little precise reading here. He tells Moses tells them, so build yourselves cities for your children and enclosures for your sheep, right? And what has proceeded from your mouth you shall do. Now, this is not exactly what they proposed if you look at the ordering, because here Moses says, first, build yourself cities for your children, right? And only then for your sheep, emphasizing and preempting the concern for the children. Whereas when they proposed, they said, we will build sheepfolds, containments for our livestock here, and cities for our children. So it seems like Reuben and Gad in their original proposal preempted the sheep, which seems to emphasize their prioritizing their sheep. That's the reason why they want to, right, inherit the eastern lands, because it's great grazing land. That's how the whole chapter begins. The descendants of Reuben and Gad had an abundance of livestock, very numerous. And here we see the emphasis on the livestock. And Moses kind of reproves and says, okay, I accept your offer, but he corrects them. First, look out for your children, and then for your livestock. But of course, this only relates to Reuben and Gad. It doesn't mention the half tribe of Menashe at all. They're not part of this request. But later on, in the end of this chapter, right, they are mentioned, right? Look what happens at the end. Look in verse 33, suddenly we have a mention. Moses gave the descendants of Gad and the descendants of Reuben and half the tribe of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sichon and the kingdom of Og, etc. Right? So once again, even in the original chapter in the book of Numbers, the tribe of Manasseh is only mentioned at a secondary stage. And it doesn't seem like Manasseh approached Moses. It was Reuben and Gad, and then Moses, seemingly upon his own initiative, decides to also allot to half of the tribe of Manasseh land on the east. Now, what's the motive of Moses, if indeed he adds Manasseh here out of his own initiative, assuming that Manasseh was interested, but they didn't approach and request. Moses himself proposes this and gives them land on the east. So I want to suggest that maybe this is part of Moses' plan to ensure unity of the nation, because what's happening is basically two tribes, important tribes, Reuben and Gad, are going to be across a natural border, the Jordan River, in a different mountain range from a distance. And of course, the obvious danger and concern is that they will separate from the people. What's Moses' brilliant initiative here? What's the best way to keep them unified nonetheless with their brothers to the west? He splits a tribe into two. And here there are, of course, very strong connections within the tribe, family connections. And by doing so, he kind of ensures that the eastern tribes, as exemplified by Manasseh, will be connected to the western tribes, because there's even one tribe itself which is split between east and west. So going back to our chapter here, Manasseh once again is mentioned kind of separately as receiving a certain blessing, which emphasizes again the tremendous wealth, right, that Manasseh has, right? Return with much wealth to your dwelling, and with very much cattle, with silver and with gold, etc. This blessing seems to echo the early blessing of Jacob in the book of Genesis to his son Joseph. Remember that Ephraim and Manasseh are two sons of Joseph. Joseph basically had two tribes come forth from him, Manasseh being one of them. And in the blessing, the original blessing of Joseph, which was given by Jacob, here you can see it begins in verse 22 in Genesis chapter 49, towards the end of the book, right? So a charming son is Joseph, a son charming to the eye, etc., etc. And then there's kind of an emphasis on the great blessing that will be upon Joseph. The blessings of your father surpass the blessings of my parents. The ends of the everlasting hills, may they come to Joseph's head and to the crown of the one who was separated from his brothers. So we see here an emphasis on great blessing, and it seems here that Joshua in our chapter is kind of echoing that and emphasizing a blessing of wealth that Manasseh has, and also encouraging him to share his wealth with the rest of his brothers. Now, I have a sense that behind this blessing and encouragement may also be a certain critique of maybe exaggerated materialism on the part of Manasseh, the half Manasseh here, and in general, the 2.5 tribes, something which we already saw in the original Numbers, where they put an emphasis on their livestock. This blessing, which at face value seems very positive, return with great wealth, may also hint towards an exaggerated materialism, something which was the original motive for their staying on the eastern side. Okay, so this is the first section where they depart and kind of closes circle with the opening chapter, where at the end of chapter 1, Joshua speaks exactly to those eastern tribes and reminding them to fulfill their pledge to Moses. And now he releases them and says, now is the time when you can return to your families on the eastern side. Many diachronic scholars have found that there might be some differences between the first section that we just read and the continuation of the chapter, maybe a two-stage kind of redaction, and they've seen some differences in language and emphasis. In any event, the continuation of the chapter recounts what happens after these 2.5 tribes depart. Verse 9, and the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh returned and departed from the children of Israel, which is an interesting term. They departed from the children of Israel. Well, they're part of the children of Israel themselves. So it already kind of hints towards a separation from the nation, right? So they departed from the children of Israel out of Shiloh, which has become the center, which is in the land of Canaan, to go to the country of Gilad, to the land of their possession, of which they were possessed according to the word of the Lord through Moses. So they decide to go now back to the east. And they came to the regions of the Jordan, the river, that are in the land of Canaan. And the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh built an altar there by the Jordan, a great altar to look upon. And the children of Israel heard say, behold, the children of Israel referring to the tribes on the west, behold, the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh have built an altar over against the land of Canaan in the regions of the Jordan at the side of the children of Israel. They have built, so there are 9.5 tribes on the west have now here that the 2.5 tribes have built an altar on the Jordan, next to the Jordan River, apparently on the west side of the Jordan River. Okay. And when the children of Israel heard of it, the whole congregation of the children of Israel assembled at Shiloh to go up to war against them. This is quite striking. They hear the news of the construction of an altar, and now they assemble again at Shiloh. This is the location from which they began the allotment of the remaining tribes in the west. Has become the center point of the nation at this stage, Shiloh. And they amass there to go to war. And we ask ourselves, what's so harsh and horrible about building an altar? Why are the people so enraged and wanting to go to war against their brothers? Big question. Verse 13, and the children of Israel sent to the children of Reuben and to the children of Gad and to half the tribe of Manasseh into the land of Gilad, Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the priest. So they send Pinchas, now, the descendant of Aaron, the son of Eleazar, the high priest, and with him 10 princes, one prince of a father's house for each of the tribes of Israel. Right, so we have 9.5 tribes, so they get 10 tribes are in the west. They have representatives from each of them, and they were each one of the head of the house of their fathers among the thousands of Israel. And they came to the children of Reuben and to the children of Gad and to the half tribe of Manasseh, to the land of Gilad, and they spoke with them, saying, thus said the whole congregation of the Lord, what treachery is this that you have committed against the God of Israel, to turn away this day from following the Lord, in that you have built an altar that you might rebel this day against the Lord? So they view this as an act of treachery. The Hebrew is the word ma'al, mahamal. What is this act of treachery? And we're pretty stunned as readers. Why would building an altar be considered treachery? And they continue in their speech. This committee that was sent by the 9.5 Western tribes, they continue. Is the iniquity of Peor too little for us, from which we have not been cleansed until this day? And there was a plague in the congregation of the Lord, and you will turn away this day from following the Lord. And it will be, since you rebel today against the Lord, that tomorrow he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel. So they mention the iniquity of Peor, right? What does that refer to? The iniquity of Peor, that is recounted as well in the book of Numbers. We read in chapter 25 following: Israel settled in Shittim, and the people began to commit harlotry with the daughters of the Moabites. They invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and prostrated themselves to their gods. Israel became attached to Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord flared against Israel. So basically, when they were in this area in Shittim, right, on the east of the Jordan, not too far, they are enticed by the daughters of Moab, and they commit harlotry. And this harlotry, this connection with the daughters of Moab, also leads to idolatry and connecting to Baal Peor. They were invited to offer sacrifices to the Moabite god. And the outcome, God is enraged, right? And the Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders of the people and hang them before the Lord facing the sun. And then the flaring anger of the Lord will be removed from Israel. And Moses said to the judges of Israel, each of you shall kill the men who became attached to Baal Peor. Then an Israelite man came and brought the Midianite woman to his brethren before the eyes of Moses and before the eyes of the entire congregation of the children of Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Suddenly, this Israelite brings one of these foreign women before the whole congregation. Pinchas, the son of Elazar. Now notice who we're talking about. Pinchas, or Phineas, right? Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen, the priest, saw this, arose from the congregation and took a spear in his hand. He went after the Israelite man into the chamber and drove it through both of them, the Israelite man and the woman, through her stomach, and the plague ceased from the children of Israel. Those that died in the plague numbered 24,000. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen, has turned my anger away from the children of Israel by his zealously avenging me among them, so that I did not destroy the children of Israel because of my zeal. Therefore, say, I have given him my covenant of peace. It shall be for him and for his descendants after him as an eternal covenant of kehunah, priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and atoned for the children of Israel. So we have here the account of the sin of Baal Peor, which led to a general plague facing the people, and it was put to an end by that very same Pinchas. Now here, once again, that is what's mentioned in the speech by this commission, representative commission led by Pinchas. They mention the iniquity of Peor. What does that have to do with it? This iniquity of Peor is harlotry and idolatry. And these people are building an altar, seemingly for the Lord. So maybe it hints towards the conception by the 9.5 tribes that this is an act of idolatry. That's a possibility, right? Even though it's surprising. But what seems quite evident is that they're afraid that a similar plague will afflict now the people because of this act. And that's what's emphasized in the end of verse 18, right? That tomorrow he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel. So they say, however, if the land of your possession is unclean, and here we see kind of a perspective where the east is not considered of the same status as west of the Jordan, right? And east of the Jordan may be an unclean land, impure land, whereas the Holy Land is to the west of the Jordan. So they say, if your land of possession is unclean, then pass you over the land of the possession of the Lord, in which the Lord's tabernacle dwell, and take possession among us, but do not rebel against the Lord, nor rebel against us. In your building an altar, besides the altar of the Lord our God. So here we already have a more explicit statement where they are angered and frightened and concerned about an additional altar being built besides the central altar, which is in Shiloh now. And they even mention an additional sin of the past, a more recent one. Did not Achan, the son of Zerach, commit a trespass in the devoted thing, and wrath fell on all the congregation of Israel? And that man did not perish alone in his iniquity. So the second sin that they mention is that of Achan, if you recall, right, in the conquest of Jericho, Achan took from the prohibited spoils of the city, which were supposed to be consecrated to the Lord, and that led to the defeat of the Israelites in the following battle versus the Ai. So they mention these two sins, Baal Peor and the sin of Achan. Now, what's interesting is that this act was viewed as an act of treachery, right? And the Hebrew word for it was ma'al, right? Mahama'al in verse 16, right? What treachery is this? And they mentioned two sins, like we said, Baal Peor and the sin of Achan. And what's interesting is that in both of these sins, that word, mal, treachery, is used. With regard to Achan's sin, that's how the chapter in Joshua, chapter 7, begins. And the children of Israel committed a trespass in the consecrated thing. For Achan, etc., right, took of the consecrated things, and that in Hebrew, vayima'alu, b'nei Israel ma'al, that same language of a trespass. And so too, with regard to the sin against Baal Peor, that is the language used as well, an act of ma'al against the Lord. Here we see it in Numbers chapter 31, when Moses reproves for not taking vengeance upon the woman. He says, why did you leave the woman alive after they revenged the act of the Midianites? He says, they were the same ones who were involved with the children of Israel on Balaam's advice to betray the Lord, right? Over the incident of Peor, resulting in a plague among the congregation of the Lord. Right here, the translation is not consistent. It uses the word betray instead of an act of treason in any event, but the Hebrew is the same. Ma'al, so ma'al ba'Hashem. So it's interesting that same term is actually used with regard to these two sins. Why are these two sins explicitly stated, right, in response to what's happening here with the building of the altar? So one, the Baal Peor is an act of idolatry. The act that Achan does is an act by taking some of the forbidden spoils of the city is different. I think may hint to what the Israelites on the west think about those on the east. You are sinning and behaving like Achan, namely you are totally motivated by material greed, just like Achan wanted to take spoils against the command of the Lord. And this is leading also to an act of treachery against the Lord, a rebellion against the Lord, which could be viewed as a form of idolatry. This is going to be an alternative, right, temple, which will turn against the Lord and be separate from our central sanctuary in Shiloh. Right. So it is clear that the Israelites here see this as something which is totally unacceptable and reminiscent of previous sins which brought plagues upon all the people. Now, this anger seems to be premised upon a conception that you're only allowed to have one central sanctuary. And this, of course, is indicative of a Deuteronomic perspective. The book of Deuteronomy is the book that emphasizes the need to have only one chosen place. We see it, for example, in Deuteronomy chapter 12, where the command is as follows: you shall not do as all the things that we do here this day, every man doing what he deems fit, for you have not yet come to the resting place or to the inheritance which the Lord your God is giving you. This is, of course, in the Torah before they enter the land. And you shall cross the Jordan and settle in the land of the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and he will give you rest from all your enemies surrounding you, and you will dwell securely. And it will be that the place the Lord your God will choose in which to establish his name, there you shall bring all that I am commanding you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices and your tithes and the separation by your hand and the choice of vows of which you will vow to the Lord. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your sons, your daughters, etc., etc. Beware lest you offer up your burnt offerings any place you see, but only in the place the Lord will choose in one of your tribes. There you shall offer up your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I command you. So it's explicitly stated that when they will cross the Jordan, there's going to be one place where they have to worship. This is the Deuteronomic perspective of the centralization of the cult. One place, and this is exactly the conception behind the complaint of the rest of the 9.5 tribes. What's going on here? You're building another altar. Indeed, the issue of having to come to one place also appears even in their travels in the desert. Beforehand, we find in Leviticus chapter 17, right? And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and to his sons and to all the children of Israel, and say to them, this is the thing the Lord has commanded, saying, any man of the house of Israel who slaughters an ox, a lamb, or a goat inside the camp, or who slaughters outside the camp, but does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to offer up as a sacrifice to the Lord before the Mishkan of the Lord, the act shall be counted for that man as blood. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from amongst the people, in order that the children of Israel should bring their offerings which they slaughter on the open field and bring them to the Lord, the entrance of the tent of meeting, to the Kohen, the priest, and slaughter them as peace offerings to the Lord, etc. Right. So this was the conception in the travels of the desert, that they had to bring any animal they slaughter before the tent of meeting. And this is the future command in Deuteronomy to have a centralized location. When was this supposed to take place? When there's security and the Israelites have conquered the land. And here, this seemingly is the point where the land has been, for the most part, conquered. And we see these 2.5 tribes building an altar. And the Israelites think that this is a rebellion. Now the response. This is on the verge of war. This was a preliminary commission sent, basically warning that the 2.5 tribes are rebelling with the intention of a future war against them. We're on the verge of civil war. The response. Then the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh answered and spoke to the heads of the thousands of Israel. God, the Lord, God, the Lord, he knows, and Israel, he shall know. If it be in rebellion or if in transgression against the Lord, save us not this day. If we have built us an altar to turn away from following the Lord, or if to offer upon it burnt offering or meal offering, or if to offer peace offerings upon it, let the Lord himself require it. If we have not rather done it for fear of this thing, saying, in time to come, your children might speak to our children, saying, what have you to do with the Lord God of Israel? For the Lord has made the Jordan a border between us and you. You, children of Reuben and children of Gad, you have no part in the Lord. So shall your children make our children cease from fearing the Lord. Therefore we said, let us now prepare to build an altar for ourselves, not for burnt offering, nor for sacrifice, but that it may be a witness between us and you and between our generations after us, that we might do the service of the Lord before him with our burnt offerings and with our sacrifices and with our peace offerings, that your children will not say to our children in time to come, you have no part in the Lord. Therefore we said, it will be when we shall say, behold, the replica of the altar of the Lord, which our fathers made, not for burnt offerings, nor for sacrifices, but it is a witness between us and you. Far be it from us that we should rebel against the Lord and turn away this day from following the Lord to build an altar for burnt offerings or meal offerings or for sacrifices, besides the altar of the Lord our God that is here, that is before his tabernacle. So here's their response. And the response is, this is not an alternative altar, right, for worship of God where sacrifices are meant to be offered. This is a replica which is just meant to be a testimony that we are part of the people of the Lord. We worship the same Lord. What was the logic behind this altar? It was basically a replica showing that, oh, there is the same connection and worship beyond the Jordan. So they made a replica upon the Jordan as a sign that everyone should know it's not solely contained within the west of the Jordan, but those on the west will see, oh, there's a replica here at the border, signifying that there are additional tribes that are worshiping the same Lord. So this is basically a sign stemming from a concern that they would be cut off from the rest of the people and cut off from God, right? Because there's a natural border that separates between them, the Jordan River. So we can see the concern of these 2.5 tribes that they might be cut off because of the geographical distance and the border between east and west of the Jordan River. Of course, one may then ask, so why don't you just stay? Why don't you just cross and live with the rest of the Israelites to the west? But they didn't. They weren't willing to give up on that. They preferred the east because of its grazing potential and their great livestock, but they still wanted to be connected. Will this explanation be accepted by the Western tribes? So let us read verse 30. And Pinchas the priest and the princes of the congregation and the heads of the thousands of Israel who were with him heard the words of the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the children of Manasseh spoke, and it pleased them. And Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, said to the children of Reuben and to the children of Gad and to the children of Manasseh, today we know that the Lord is in our midst, that you did not commit this treachery. Then you have saved the children of Israel from the hand of the Lord. They are relieved, they accept the explanation. And Pinchas, the son of Eleazar the priest, notice the emphasis on Pinchas here throughout the narrative, and the princes returned from the children of Reuben and from the children of Gad and from the land of Gilad to the land of Canaan to the children of Israel, and they brought them back word. And the thing pleased the children of Israel. And the children of Israel blessed God, and they did not intend to go up against them in battle to destroy the land in which the children of Reuben and Gad dwelt. And the children of Reuben and the children of Gad called the altar. And here there apparently is something missing, for it is a witness between us that the Lord is God. Some say that maybe it was called witness. The altar itself was called witness, and that may be the case, right? That definitely underlies the purpose and function of this altar. It's fascinating to see the role of Pinchas and how it has changed, right? Because if we recall the portion that we read in the book of Numbers, Pinchas actually acted violently against that Israelite who brought the Midianite woman before the congregation, striking them with a spear, killing them both, the Israelite and the Midianite woman, there with an act of violence, right, stemming from his zealousness for the Lord. And his reward was that he would be allotted a reward of peace, right? This is once again in Numbers chapter 25. Therefore say, I hereby give him my covenant of peace. This was the reward to Pinchas for his zealousness and violence, right? Interestingly enough, this covenant of peace actually eventually plays out in a very critical stage in Israelite history where there was a potential for an outbreak of civil war, right, between the eastern tribes and the western tribes, which could have been devastating. But thanks to Pinchas, right, and the wisdom of an initial investigation before actually running to conclusions, verifying the initiative and understanding that it was of a positive nature and not of a rebellion against God, it is thanks to Pinchas that indeed peace reigned between the eastern and western tribes. So that covenant of peace, which was bestowed upon Pinchas, actually plays out later on in history in a very critical stage where it is thanks to the leadership of Pinchas that civil war is averted.